This is Cure Top. Here are 100 swamp and bog finds preserved better than in a museum. The oldest brain. Archaeologists found preserved brain tissue, a rare survival, in a pre-dynastic Egyptian burial. The skull was from a person buried in a plain pit, with no embalming or body treatment, dating to the late 4th millennium before Christ. The preservation is explained not by ritual, but by the conditions. Dry sand, high temperatures, and salty soil created an environment in which the soft tissues did not decompose completely. A dense dark mass mirroring the brain lobes' shape was found inside the skull. Analysis confirmed the tissue is altered but identifiable nervous tissue, not sediment or contamination, and it's not linked to an elite burial. This isn't a priest or ruler, just an ordinary person. His brain was preserved by chance, not by intent. This is one of the earliest known cases of human brain preservation, and a rare reminder of how chance sometimes preserves what people will later try to control deliberately. The shield from the Thames. In 2019, during construction work on the banks of the Thames in London, an object was found that instantly made headlines. It was a shield. Not bronze, not iron, but made of wood. It's around 2,400 years old, which was surprising since it was thought wooden shields couldn't last that long, especially in river sediments. The shield was made of willow planks, held with leather and a thin painted limestone layer. Its surface features red and black, concentric Celtic circles. At the center is a convex boss protecting the hand, with visible repair traces around it. The wood shows marks from clamps, patches, and resin streaks. Everything indicates that the item was not decorative, but meant for battle. For archaeologists, the find was a revelation. Until then, it was believed that Iron Age warriors in Britain used only bronze or metal shields. Wooden ones were mentioned in sources, but there was no direct evidence. They've been found and are in excellent condition. Researchers note that the shield's design was ingeniously thought out. Light, strong, and flexible, it was perfect for close combat. Laboratory tests showed that it could withstand heavy blows, and its shape helped absorb the energy. At the end of November 1896, two boys were riding their bicycles along the beach of Anastasia Island when they suddenly saw something in the sand that made them drop their bikes. On the shore lay a carcass the size of a boat, shapeless, pale pink, as if it were made of rubber. No bones, no eyes, no head, just a huge, dense mass of flesh that looked as if the ocean had washed ashore a creature from a nightmare. The local doctor, Dr. Webb, arrived at the scene the next morning and immediately realized it wasn't a whale. But then what was it? The carcass was elastic, heavy, and by his estimate, weighed nearly 5 tons. He decided that what they had before them was a gigantic octopus, unknown to science. Later, the photos were sent to the university where Professor Verrill, a top cephalopod expert, initially confirmed the guess and then named the creature a new species, Octopus giganteus. 6 horses pulled the carcass from the water to prevent the waves from taking it. It became a local sensation. People came to see the Florida monster as if it had stepped right out of the pages of sea legends. Decades later, electron microscope studies of the preserved tissue revealed no giant octopus. It was just pure collagen. The sample was actually decomposed whale skin, with its shape and bones gone. Today, scientists call such finds globsters, dense lumps of organic matter that the ocean washes ashore, turning an ordinary carcass into something that looks like a mythical monster. Bread bearing Christ's image. Archaeologists in Turkey discovered a rare early Christian artifact, a charred loaf of bread with Jesus Christ's image, buried for 1,200 years. The discovery occurred in Karaman province at the Toprak Tepe site, formerly the city of Iranopolis. The bread dates to the 7th or 8th centuries AD, when Christian symbolism was just starting to develop its established forms. This is one of 5 loaves from the same layer, all preserved by natural carbonization, intense heating without air. One has a faint embossed image of Christ and an inscription, with gratitude to the blessed Jesus. Archaeologists note the image differs from the traditional pantocrator of Byzantine icons, depicting Christ as the sower, symbolizing fertility, labor, and life cycle. Some loaves have crosses and ornaments, with one resembling the Maltese cross. Researchers suggest that this is not just food, but a special type of liturgical bread, a prototype of the Eucharist, used during worship services. Chemical analysis showed that finely ground wheat mixed with ash and salts was used in the composition, which confirms its ritual purpose. The preservation conditions are unique. The bread did not turn to dust even after 12 centuries. This is one of the best preserved finds of Christian ritual food in history. The uranium cubes of Haigerloch. Haigerloch is a small town in southwest Germany, located beneath a church in a rock chamber. In 1944 and 1945, there was an effort to start a nuclear reactor, a facility designed to sustain a reaction for hours, not a bomb. Werner Heisenberg's team hung hundreds of cast uranium cubes on steel cables in a tank. Heavy water at the bottom acted as a moderator, surrounded by a protective layer, cables, and instruments. The concept is simple. Slowed neutrons are more likely to strike uranium, sustaining the chain reaction without outside help. If successful, the reactor is operational. What went wrong? There was a chronic material shortage. Uranium arrived in inconsistent batches. Heavy water was scarce, and the cramped chamber limited grid spacing for the cubes. Engineers adjusted suspension distances, rearranged clusters, and added rows, but the setup still didn't work. On paper, it was close, but not in reality. In April 1945, the Allied ALSOS group arrived, opened the chamber, drained the tank, and removed the suspensions. The uranium, documents, and some equipment were taken as trophies, mostly to the United States, with the rest sent to scientific centers. Since then, stories about the cubes have continued to surface. One was also found in a university basement, in the physics department at a museum. They're easy to spot: a loop mark on the edge, darkened surface, and oxide crust. Sometimes cubes from Haigerloch appear at auctions without proper provenance. That's where the legends come from. They were sunk during evacuation, buried in the forest, or slipped into people's pockets. Many paper certificates for samples are lost, so rumors persist longer than facts. The latest conspiracy theory claims Haigerloch uranium cubes were used both in the reactor's grid and in the Die Glock project. They say the heavy metal was used as shielding elements or as components inside the bell-shaped machine under Silesia. If you add the concrete ring in Ludwikovice, Purple Zerum 525, and Kamler to Haigerloch, the theory is complete. Uranium blanks were cast under the church for the bell, intended to suppress gravity. But without emotions, nothing remains. There are no blueprints, records of materials for the bell, or photo units that these cubes would fit. Haigerloch's surviving samples clearly belong to a conventional nuclear facility. Their shape and suspension traces suggest a reactor grid, not a time machine. The idea that the cubes are parts of the bell is still an unconfirmed legend, much like the bell itself, which probably exists only in stories. The Gebel el Arak knife. This knife was found at the end of the 19th century near Gebel el Arak, and at first glance it looks like an ordinary ceremonial weapon from pre-dynastic Egypt. The flint blade is finely crafted with an ivory handle, but the more you examine it, the more something feels off. The handle features a complex scene: people, boats, battling groups, and a central figure holding two lions by their manes. This motif is rare in early Egypt, but common in Mesopotamia. This scene appears to come from another culture, where mythological images of power, strength, and control over chaos already existed. For Egypt of the 4th millennium before Christ, this looks too early and too alien. A question arises, which still causes debate. Was this a borrowed image, the result of distant contacts, or are we seeing evidence that early Egypt was formed not in isolation, but in close dialogue with other centers of the ancient world? The knife was likely never used in battle. Its main value lies in symbolizing status, power, and elite membership. It shows that even before the pharaohs, there were people who thought in terms of symbols of propaganda and displays of power. This shows that beneath prehistoric Egypt's facade, a complex and aggressive political reality already existed. The Gebel el Arak knife does not prove the existence of a lost civilization, but it makes one thing clear: the origins of Egyptian statehood were much more complex and international than is usually shown in simplified chronologies. A sound from ancient times. In the residential quarter of Akhetaten, the capital of Pharaoh Akhenaten, built in the middle of the desert as a symbol of the new religion, archaeologists found an object that at first might have seemed insignificant. A small bone cylinder the size of a finger phalanx with a neatly carved hole and a beveled edge at the mouthpiece. Only after careful inspection did it become clear this was not an ornament or fragment, but a whistle. Made from a light tubular bone, likely from a bird or small ungulate, it shows surface polishing and a dark residue inside from extended use. Evidence shows it wasn't just kept but used. It makes a steady tone, and covering the hole changes the pitch. It's not a musical instrument, but a working signaling device. Its exact use is unclear, though there are some theories. In Amarna, also known as Akhetaten, such items are rare and found only in residential or craft areas. It might have been a child's whistle, a toy, or a workshop signaling tool to cut through yard noise and alert assistants. There's also a theory of ritual use. Sound often accompanied Egyptian household ceremonies, processions, and prayers. The whistle is cleanly carved with even proportions and beveled edges. All this indicates that such items were produced in small batches near the bone carving workshop. Maybe it was just a normal part of daily life, as familiar as dishes or a lamp. A block from the Ice Age. Brendan Dudas, a 31-year-old teacher from Indianapolis, tried to remove a stone blocking his lawn mowing. As he dug, he found it didn't end, hauling out soil by bucket. He filmed the process on TikTok, where the video went viral with over 9 million views. Calling a crane proved useful. Only with a lift did we realize the boulder weighed over 10.3 tons. Dudas himself estimates its age at 10 to 15,000 years, dating back to the last ice age. He moved the boulder to the yard's center, surrounded it with stones, added mulch and soil, and planted local plants. He plans to install lighting. In this way, the giant boulder from the Ice Age became a local landmark. In a People interview, he said working with the boulder made him renovate the entire yard, and neighbors said it inspired others to improve their own yards. Geologically, it's simple. The glacier brought the stone, and over years, soil gradually covered it. From a human perspective, it's a rare case when a problem turns into a reason to tidy up and leave a mark. Skeletons and jewels. Picture an altar in a Bavarian church with a skeleton in a glass sarcophagus, adorned with gold, gems, lace, and a wig. This Baroque-era installation features relics created in the 17th and 18th centuries, when ancient bones from Roman catacombs became dazzling patrons of German and Swiss cities. This was how the Catholic world responded to the Reformation, during which many relics were lost. A strong visual gesture was needed to unite the community and bring pilgrims back. How was this done? Rome provided authenticity certificates for the bones, confirming they came from the catacombs. The remains were often assigned new names like Valentine or Candid. On site, the bones were assembled into a full figure, with missing parts replaced by wood and wax. Glass eyes were added to the skull, and silk and lace were draped over it. None sewed on gold and gems. The finished figure was a radiant heavenly warrior in a gilded casket by the side altar. This worked on 3 levels at once. Faith, the city gained its own holy protector. Politics, the Counter-Reformation demonstrated the wealth of Catholic tradition without lengthy debates. Economics, the church became a center of pilgrimage. But what about authenticity? Radiocarbon tests date some of these saints to the 1st to 3rd centuries. The bones are truly ancient. Martyrdom isn't always verifiable, and the jeweled casing was made by craftsmen. During the Enlightenment, many of these figures were put away in storage, but today they are gradually being restored and displayed as monuments of both faith and art. The result is clear. This is not a cheap fake or a miracle, but a unique blend of religious ideas, Baroque taste, and urban identity. What do we see in the altar display case? A relic, a tool of its time, or a Baroque spectacle? It appears to be all three, as these skeletons still draw attention and questions today. The paintings of Hierakonpolis. In Hierakonpolis, a major pre-dynastic Egyptian center, archaeologists discovered wall paintings from about 3,300 before Christ. This is one of the earliest narrative images in the history of Egypt in general. Not ornaments or abstract signs, but scenes with people, boats, processions, and violence. For its time, this level of visual storytelling is extremely rare. The paintings repeat motifs, boats with high prows, armed figures, and scenes of suppression. Some characters are depicted larger, which in Egyptian tradition usually signifies status. There are no names, inscriptions, or titles nearby. The image doesn't depict a specific event, but instead models power with one center dominating others. It's especially strange that these scenes appear before royal iconography develops. Here, the idea of a ruler, control, and violence as tools of governance already exists, but there is not yet a pharaoh as an institution. The visual language of power exists, but there is no official name for it. The Lednicki face, Poland, Lake Lednica. During work in the coastal area of the First Piast fortress, archaeologists raised an oak beam 1 meter and 34 centimeters long, part of a fortress hook that held the rampart from spreading. On one end, there is a carved human face, an oval rim, an arch above the forehead, a rounded chin, about 13.5 by 10 centimeters in size. The face looked at the water, not the fortress. Dendrochronology gave the exact age of the tree trunk. It's around 960 to 975 AD, the very time when the prince's residence, a chapel and baptismal pools, stood on Lednicki Island. For 10th century Slavs, carved human faces on buildings were rare. In this case, the image was placed on the rampart's outer side, as if addressing the lake. This could be a water spirit, a crossing guardian, or a symbol of Christianity at the edge of paganism. The island is a key site for the Christianization of Polish lands and is compared to the Slavic anthropomorphic figurines of Izvolin and the four-faced idols. There are stylistic similarities, but no direct analogies. The carved face is being conserved, with the wood stabilized to prevent cracking outdoors. The find will be displayed at the Museum of the First Piasts in late 2026. The first green mummy. In one of the tombs of the Egyptian necropolis in Abydos, archaeologists came across a sarcophagus covered on the inside with a thin green coating. At first, they thought it was just traces of copper or mold, but analysis showed that it was actually a real mineral deposit of malachite. Over time, they seeped into the mummy's bandages and skin, giving the body a strange green tint. The burial is about 2,600 years old. Inside is a man, based on the bones and features, a wealthy individual but not a pharaoh. They found amulets, incense vessels, and oil remnants used to cover the body before mummification in the tomb. The copper salts in the mixture caused the mummy to turn green over centuries. For Egyptians, green was more than decoration. It symbolized Osiris's rebirth, vegetation, and eternal life. That's why, even in this accidental chemical reaction, there's symbolism. The body became literally, not just metaphorically, eternal. Copper compounds could have entered the tomb from jewelry, vessels, or pigments used in painting. But the result looked so unusual that the mummy received an unofficial name, the green one, copper fracture. In late pre-dynastic Egypt, copper objects appeared that were too complex for a society not yet a full-fledged state. We're not discussing random finds, but systematic items, knives, awls, hooks, jewelry, and refined copper tools. The earliest of these date back to the 4th millennium before Christ, long before large-scale construction and centralized production. The issue is that the Nile Valley lacks copper deposits large enough for extraction in the needed amounts. Analysis shows the raw materials came from Sinai and the Levant, indicating logistics and supply control. The metal did not end up in Egypt by accident. It was deliberately imported, processed, and distributed, and primarily among the elite. This is evident from where such items are found, in rich burials and ritual complexes. The processing technologies also raise questions. Copper needed smelting plus precise temperature and consistent processing. Tool marks reveal craftsmen cast blanks before refining them with cold forging, creating strong functional shapes. This isn't about isolated experiments. It's a skill handed down and rooted in the craft community. In dynastic Egypt, some copper items were made from copper alloys with arsenic impurities, making the metal harder. These alloys need careful ore selection and process control, or they become brittle or unusable. At the same time, there is no evidence of systematic experiments with composition in the archaeological layers from this period. The items immediately have working characteristics. This is seen by the wear on the edges and traces of use, not by theoretical reconstructions. The Cauldron of War. Brandenburg and der Havel. In the courtyard next to Gotthardkirchplatz, archaeologists are uncovering a layer of old half-timbering and pulling a copper cauldron out of the ground. Inside there aren't hundreds of coins, just 3 silver rings. Yet these rings reveal more about the past than books. This is a Swiss Dicken from Zug, dated 1610, featuring St. Oswald, a Reichsdaler from 1618, the very beginning of the 13 Years' War, and a city coin from Hamburg from 1634, bearing the name of Ferdinand II, 3 coins, 3 roots, Switzerland, the Netherlands, northern Germany, and Hamburg. From this geography, it's clear that in war-torn Central Europe, money traveled along with refugees, mercenaries, craftsmen, and trade caravans. Why are there just 3 coins in such a large cauldron? The most likely reason is the owner had just begun saving and hadn't returned yet. There's also another possible explanation. Valuables were hidden in multiple places to avoid losing them all at once. This spot was one of those caches. Nearby there was slag, solder drops, and non-ferrous metal fragments. A craftsman likely worked here, using the cauldron as a simple tool until the war made it a safe. This little set clearly shows the spirit of that era, that people were always preparing for war, epidemics, or something else, making provisions for a rainy day. Sometimes the past isn't chests full of thalers, but 3 silver coins hastily hidden just to survive until tomorrow. A guest from ancient Egypt. In Pere's rock-cut tomb, archaeologists unexpectedly found a small faience Patikos, the Egyptian protector god and afterlife guardian. It was found among beads, amulets, and the remains of 14 people, a rare occurrence in Anatolia. Adıyaman Museum publications call it the first recorded find of its kind here, and it's immediately clear what's most important. This is not just a pretty trinket, but a functional amulet that was placed there intentionally. Patikos in Egypt protects against evil, disease, bites, and guides people through danger. If such an amulet was found in a Hellenistic tomb in Commagene, it shows the family accepted Egyptian protection in their rituals. Peri stood at the crossroads of Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the Mediterranean. This explains the trade connections and the rapid migration of ideas, but trade alone cannot explain it. An alien symbol was incorporated into the local set of wires for the deceased, along with the usual beads and pendants. What caught my attention here was the word alien. The Egyptian amulet complements, rather than conflicts with, the Anatolian burial style, forming a unified sense of protection. The figurine shows how ancient societies easily adopted useful foreign symbols into their beliefs. A city without walls. Near Hradec Králové in the Czech Republic, archaeologists excavated a 62-acre Celtic settlement, about the size of 25 football fields. Coins and pottery date it to the 4th century before Christ, late Iron Age. The culture is Latin, known for the weapons and ornaments typical of Central European Celts. It's unusual that there are no walls or ditches for that period. Their defense depended on trade, not a fortress. During the excavation season, archaeologists collected 13,000 bags of finds, including bronze and iron brooches, glass beads, gold and silver coins, amber, and quality ceramics. Amber came from the north along the so-called Amber Road, a land route between the Baltic coast and the Adriatic. Its peak development dates back to the 2nd century before Christ. The inhabitants left the settlement in the 1st century before Christ without signs of fire or raid, likely due to changing trade routes. Today, the excavation is known as one of the largest Celtic sites in the Czech Republic and shows how the economy could replace fortress walls. The first mummy. For a long time, it was believed that mummification appeared in Egypt only during the era of the pharaohs, around 2600 before Christ, along with the pyramids and an established religion. However, in burials from the pre-dynastic period dated between 4500 and 3500, before Christ, archaeologists discovered bodies preserved by artificial means. These findings have been recorded in the regions of Badari and Upper Egypt, and they do not fit the explanation of natural mummification by sand. Tissue analysis revealed resins, vegetable oils, and antiseptics were intentionally applied before burial. In 2014, chemical tests showed these mixtures functioned almost identically to those used in classical mummification 1,500 to 2,000 years later. People were experimenting with body preservation long before priests, texts, or religious canons appeared. Such burials are also not rare. Body treatment traces found at multiple burial sites suggest it was a common practice, not an exception. The body is positioned, wrapped in cloth, and treated to slow decomposition. All this occurred before Egypt became a state or had central authority. These findings show that the idea of preserving the body arose as a practical action, not as a regional dogma. Later, a complex belief system about the soul, judgment, and the afterlife developed around this practice. But originally, mummification was an experiment that turned out to be so important that it survived for thousands of years and became one of the foundations of Egyptian civilization. Khmer dinosaur. Taprom Temple, Cambodia, late 12th century. In one niche is a palm-sized bas-relief of a lizard-like creature with 4 legs and back plates. Tourists quickly called it a stegosaurus because textbooks say only late Jurassic dinosaurs have similar plates. The relief is carved at the same level as many other ornaments in the same gray sandstone. The wall is covered with a thin biological patina. The thickness of the coating was measured with a laser scanner. It is even with no clean tracks that would have been left by recent carving. Chemical analysis of the patina showed an age of at least 500 years. That means the work dates back to the period when the temple was built. What did the archaeologists pay attention to? The plates have the shape and arrangement of palm leaves, a common framing method for animal figures by toprom artists. Without the leafy border, you see a typical rhinoceros, large body, thick legs, short tail. This fits the complex's iconography, as Angkor bas-reliefs often feature rhinoceroses. Now I'll explain why the dinosaur theory emerged. By the early 2000s, the stone's patina had worn, leaf edges faded, and its silhouette started to look like plates. The photos circulated on paleomyth forums, and the story spread without source verification. When the panel was cleaned with microabrasive, in 2023 remnants of the leaf's veins, and small decorative carvings appeared, which are never depicted on the backs of dinosaurs. Conclusion: this is just an ordinary Khmer rhinoceros, and the plates are simply part of a palm tree worn down by time. One worn-out ornament turned into a dinosaur sensation, although what we actually have here is just a worn-out background. Centuries-old glass. In one of the museums in Europe, there is an object that, at first glance, looks like a designer bowl from a modern glass-blowing studio. Thin strips of colored glass twist into a spiral, forming a dense, even pattern. But the age of this item is about 2,250 years. It was made during the Hellenistic era. At that time, craftsmen did not yet know how to blow glass. This technology emerged later. The bowl was handmade by winding thin molten glass threads onto a mold, layer by layer, until it reached the desired size and pattern. Each thread was laid with millimeter precision. The colored spirals have not faded, the glass has not become cloudy, and the vessel has kept its shape as if it had just come off the craftsman's work surface yesterday. Such items rarely last. Glass easily breaks, cracks, and crumbles. That's why each such item is a window into the past, into a craft that stood at the intersection of art and technology. The bowl proves ancient craftsmen were just as skilled as us. They worked the material with a deep understanding, perhaps even greater than ours. Sacrificial animals. In pre-dynastic Egypt, animals were not only bred and eaten, but also ritually killed and buried. The true scale of this phenomenon is revealed only when whole complexes are excavated. In Hierakonpolis, archaeologists found dozens of animal burials from the 4th millennium before Common Era, well before the rise of a formal pantheon and temple system. These weren't just random remains or garbage pits. The animals were often laid out whole, sometimes anatomically, sometimes showing ritual killing. The finds included large cattle, sheep, goats, dogs, wild animals like gazelles and predators. The bull burials stand out in particular. Massive bones, careful arrangement, repetition of the ritual. The bulls were not buried alone. They were sacrificed in series, which required enormous resources. Fattening an adult bull takes months or even years, so only groups with ample food supplies and herd control could afford it. In Hierakonpolis, a group of sacrificial animals was found beside elite human burials. And this is an important detail. Animals here are the equivalent of wealth, and their destruction in a ritual means that the organizers have a surplus. Such practices only occur in hierarchical societies, not in egalitarian or poor ones. At Hierakonpolis, remains of a leopard, baboon, and hippopotamus were found. In rituals, catching, holding, or killing these animals requires organizing people and time. These sacrifices appear as public displays of power, showing a person's control over both the household and dangerous nature. Sacrificial animals were buried in specific areas, linked to ritual centers and elite graves, not randomly. These discoveries challenge typical views of an early society. Mass animal sacrifice takes planning, extra resources, and people willing to follow the ritual. Here, some give orders while others follow them. This is all occurring while Egypt is not yet a formal state and lacks established royal institutions. Sword from the Vistula. Poland, Vistula River, Tarkoman area. A fisherman spots iron in the shallows, pulls it out, and finds a medieval sword. The blade suffered minimal damage in the sediment. The inscription, round pommel, and cross on the hilt are visible. The fisherman quickly gave the weapon to restorers in Warsaw. Experts verified the sword is authentic and medieval. They will determine a more exact date after examining the metal and blade shape. The river shifts course, erodes banks, and reveals things buried in silt for centuries. So the weapon could have fallen off a boat, sunk during a crossing, or been thrown into the water after a battle. The blade is being conserved, corrosion removed, metal stabilized, edge microcuts examined, and maker's marks inspected. This is our chance to recover a genuine piece of medieval Poland. Not a museum replica, but a sword that rested in the Vistula riverbed for centuries and resurfaced on its own. Darius's gold. During the excavations at Persepolis, workers found a stone box under the Apadana Palace foundation containing two thin plates, one gold and one silver. They were placed there during construction about 2,500 years ago, in the reign of Darius the Great. Both plates have cuneiform inscriptions in 3 languages. It was important to Darius that the text could be understood in different parts of his vast empire. He lists the lands, emphasizes his power, and gives thanks to Ahura Mazda. This is not a decorative item or part of a ritual. It's a statement about who built here, who owned the land, and under which god the palace stood. The plates have been preserved as if they were just taken out of the workshop. The metal hasn't cracked and the inscriptions are easy to read. They were intentionally placed in the foundation, not as a secret, but as a sign for future generations if anyone checks beneath the stone. Desert calendar. In the southern part of the Sahara, in the Nabta Playa area, archaeologists discovered stone circles and rows of megaliths dating back to around the 8th or 7th millennium before Christ. This means that they appeared thousands of years before the first dynasties of Egypt and long before the pyramids. The stones are not scattered randomly. Some of them are oriented toward the points of sunrise on the days of the solstices, while others are aligned with specific stellar directions that were significant in that era. This is neither a typical temple nor settlement, but a ritual space made by people skilled in understanding the sky, time, and nature's cycles. Nabta Playa's context is the strangest part. These structures appeared in a region that today seems like a dead desert, but back then was a seasonal center of life where groups of people would come to perform rituals connected to rains, herds, and survival. Here they find sacrificial pits, cattle bones, and traces of carefully planned rituals, which indicates the presence of an organized society and a shared belief system. This is not a primitive nomadic group, but a community already focused on calendars, sacred dates, and shared memory. This is exactly what makes Nabta Playa an important starting point. Before Egypt became a state, people in these lands already understood order, time, and ritual, which made future civilization possible. Thuringia dagger. After heavy rains near the village of Gütersleben, a bronze dagger appeared from the soil. The person who found it didn't pull it out and inform the archaeologists. At the restoration workshop in Weimar, it was confirmed that this is a Bronze Age dagger, about 3,500 years old. It's a type with a plate-shaped tang. The wide, flat heel of the blade was attached to the handle with rivets, usually made of wood, horn, or bone. The technology was advanced for its time, casting a bronze plate, shaping the edge, polishing the tang base, and drilling rivet holes. Rivet marks on these items reveal how the handle was attached and if the blade could handle stress. Next is alloy analysis, tin content, impurities, X-rays, and corrosion stabilization. Surviving organics on the tang may allow handle reconstruction. The artifact was found without a grave or cultural layer. Most likely the item was pushed to the surface by shifting karst soil after a heavy rain. This valuable find is direct evidence of craftsmanship and trade in Bronze Age Germany. These daggers may have served as weapons, status symbols, or offerings. The exact purpose will be determined by further examination. Unauthorized searches are banned in the region, and this reporting method preserves both the item and its information. After examination, the dagger will be displayed at the Elric Regional Museum. It will move from the field to a display case with a clear history of its origin. The female figure of Muromi, Russia, right bank of the Oka River, Zvayaginsky II necropolis. Thought to be cleared out by black diggers, it still produced a rare find. A female burial with an almost complete set of ornaments. A forehead wreath, twisted wire temple rings, an open-work brooch on the chest, a thin belt buckle, and pendants at the waist. It's more than beautiful. Such a set revealed age, status, affiliation, and trade partners without words. Nearby were imported beads, denarii, and dirhams. Maroma was on a trade route not isolated from events. Early chambers were long, built from birch planks. Men's graves held axes, knives, and Hungarian belts. By the 11th century, women's accessories were reduced to a pair of temporal rings, sometimes worn on the wrist, with items reflecting old Russian style. Even a random padlock with a key suggests ties to warrior traditions and Scandinavian influence. Burial mound beneath the fortress. Russia, Salikard, Abdur Fortress area. While digging a trench, an Neolithic burial site about 5,000 years old was found. There are over 18 burials with various rituals. Some bodies are wrapped in birch bark, while others rest in boats, small vessels for the journey to the underworld. The burial pits were dug up to 2 meters deep with steps going down. The reverse staircase is like an inverted ziggurat. The walls were lined with planks. Everything was generously sprinkled with ochre, then covered with wooden flooring, and then a mound was piled on top. Inverted vessels were placed on the mound. The ground would settle, the vessels would sink inside and seal the layer. Some chambers show fire traces from being burned before sealing. The deceased were sprinkled with ochre and given belongings. Key finds are ancient copper items, a trapezoidal pendant, bronze plate fragments, and small details. In the Arctic 5,000 years ago, metal signified trade or intermediaries, showing northerners weren't isolated. This isn't just a cemetery, but a collection of artifacts and rituals. Birch bark as cocoon, boat for transition, fire for purification, ochre as earth's blood, copper as prestige. The North shows that complex rituals and distant connections reached here much earlier than we used to think. A mummy with tattoos that surprised everyone. In the Gebelin area south of Thebes, several pre-dynastic mummies were discovered, dating to around 3,300 3,200 before Christ. They were long seen as ordinary finds. Upon re-examination, dark spots appeared on the skin. Initially believed to be dirt or decomposition, they were later identified as tattoos. The man's body shows clear images of a wild bull and ram with distinct, recognizable lines. The pigment was injected under his skin. These are not random marks or decorative patterns. The images are placed so that they would be visible during life. These are some of the earliest known tattoos in the world, confirmed archaeologically. Another female mummy had geometric linear patterns on her shoulder and back, repeating like a system of signs and applied using the same technique. Charcoal pigment was likely inserted into the skin with sharp tools, and puncture marks remain visible. These tattoos aren't unique to one body. They're created with similar techniques and detail levels. This shows they were made by experienced people, not first-time experimenters. A cart made of oak. Not far from Lake Savan, in the Armenian village of Leshechen, archaeologists found an object that usually doesn't survive thousands of years, a wooden cart. It lay in the ground for about 4,000 years, but remained so intact that its construction allows us to study Bronze Age transport not from drawings but from a real object. The cart is made of oak, with massive wheels and well-preserved axles. These discoveries are rare in the Caucasus and elsewhere. Wood usually decays, so archaeologists typically find only metal parts. Here, however, the shape has been preserved entirely, which gives us an idea of what the carts of the local nobility looked like and how they were assembled. Leshechen is known for its large Bronze Age necropolis, and many rich burials included carts, weapons, and ornaments. The cart's fine wood and craftsmanship suggest it belonged to someone of high status and was likely part of the burial inventory. This discovery helps researchers understand transportation in Armenia at the time and shows that local communities used wheeled vehicles well before large states emerged. An artifact from New Orleans. In New Orleans, a married couple found a marble slab with a Latin inscription in their backyard. Initially seen as decoration, the text soon drew scholars' interest. Research showed that the slab is an ancient Roman tombstone, about 1,900 years old. Engraved on it is the name Sextus Cangenius Verus, a sailor of the imperial fleet, who died at the age of 42. The artifact was thought lost since World War II, last recorded in 1939 at the National Archaeological Museum of Civitavecchia, which Allied bombings destroyed. After the war, the tombstone's location remained unknown. It is believed that the stone was taken out of Italy by American servicemen and later ended up in private ownership, being used as a garden ornament. Specialists from Tulane University and Professor Susanna Luznia confirmed the find's authenticity. The inscription matched the 1910 Latin epigraph catalog records. Mentioning a ship named after Asclepius, the god of medicine, confirmed that Ver served in the Navy during the Roman Empire's peak. The tombstone is currently in the possession of the FBI. Negotiations are underway between American and Italian authorities about returning the artifact to its homeland. United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization representatives said this case will exemplify the successful return of illegally exported cultural valuables. Boats for eternity. Funerary boats appeared in Egypt as early as the 4th millennium before Christ, 1,000 years before the first dynasties. The earliest finds have been recorded in Abydos and Hierakonpolis, where real wooden boats up to 20 meters long were discovered next to elite burials, laid in specially dug pits. They were aligned with the Nile, suggesting intentional ritual placement rather than randomness. In Abydos, archaeologists discovered over a dozen boat burials near proto-dynastic rulers' tombs. Some boats were dismantled before burial, while others were used during their owners' lives. They show signs of repairs, wear, and paint, indicating that the tomb contained objects directly linked to the owner and his status, not just symbols. In a society where the Nile was the main transportation artery, a boat meant control over movement, trade, and people. Boats with similar hulls, high prows, and elongated shapes are also widely depicted on pre-dynastic pottery. These motifs appear simultaneously in different regions, which indicates a widespread tradition rather than a local cult. Even during this period, the boat becomes a symbol of power and belonging to the elite, not just a means of transportation. Later, this idea doesn't disappear, but rather expands. Pharaoh's solar boats near the pyramids aren't new inventions, but evolved from a much older ritual. Funerary boats capture the moment when power and status begin to be seen as something that should be preserved even after death. Society is willing to spend resources with no practical value for the living on this. Did the first forest appear in Russia? In Russia, near Luga, a petrified stump with real roots was found in the Tolmachevsky quarry, something you'd expect in textbooks, not in quarry sand. It's about 385 million years old. This is the late Devonian, when land first started turning green. At first, everyone thought it was a prototaxate, the famous ancient column-shaped organisms known in this area. But the roots settled it. This isn't a column fungus, it's actually a tree. The discovery was made by an amateur paleontologist. He noticed a large piece in the sand that didn't look like an ordinary stone and showed it to the experts. Then scientists from St. Petersburg State University got involved, carefully excavated, documented, and sent the sample to the laboratory. There, by examining thin sections and tissue structure, they will determine the species and age more precisely. The first ancient forests here were important. Their roots stabilized soil, changed water runoff, and affected the carbon balance. In short, this marked the start of the forested planet we know today. You can pile up a lot of scientific terms here, but the essence is simple. Scientists went looking for a giant fungus, but ended up finding the ancestor of our forests. They now need to compare the specimen with known Devonian trees to identify it. Even if the species is uncertain, the discovery already alters the local historical understanding. Portrait of Viking. A walrus tusk miniature found in Kurgan, Norway, in 1796 and held by the National Museum of Denmark, has been redescribed. The height is about 3 centimeters, and it dates back to the second half of the 10th century. This is probably a king from the game Hnefatafl, a predecessor of chess. The key is in the details: a straight parting, tidy sideburns, a mustache above the lip, and a Spanish-style goatee braided together. Such craftsmanship is rare in Viking archaeology. Here you can see exactly how they wore their hair and beard. Curator Peter Pence calls the item as close to a portrait as we can possibly get. The hair and beard are shown from all sides, not schematically, but with fine styling details. Similar figures usually focus on the beard, a sign of masculine strength and status, which is well understood from the sagas. On this specimen, the hands are damaged, but the composition is still clear. So, we are not looking at an abstract warrior, but a specific image of a ruler, recognizable by his hairstyle and beard. The material also says a lot. Walrus ivory, a northern resource, was traded to workshops. The skilled carving and lacquering highlight craftsmanship, while the subject choice emphasizes the importance of power and appearance in public display. Jewelry for dukes. In southern Poland, archaeologists discovered a gilded silver jewelry fragment from the 14th or 15th century in the moat of ruined Kolno Castle. The thin plate, measuring 3 by 2 centimeters, has a setting with a preserved purple amethyst. Researchers Lech Marek and Beata Miazga used Raman spectroscopy, shining a laser on the stone to analyze its composition, and confirmed it was natural quartz with iron admixture. Most late medieval jewels are found either in treasures or in burials, but in this case, the item was placed intentionally. Here, the object was most likely dropped when entering or leaving the customs castle of Duke Borislav III Berjeski. The shape and quality of the workmanship suggest 2 possibilities. It could be part of a round fibula brooch or an element of a crown. At that time, stones were chosen not only for their beauty. Amethyst was seen as a talisman protecting against poison and betrayal, so it was often part of princes and church prelates' regalia. Scorpion mace. A stone mace was found in Hierakonpolis, which is now called the Scorpion mace. This is not a weapon in the practical sense, but a ritual object made of limestone dating to the very end of the pre-dynastic period, around 3,200 to 3,000 before Common Era. A scene depicts a crowned man holding a hoe before rows of people and symbols of subordinate territories, evoking public authority. All this happens before the typical pharaoh appears. The strangest part is the merging of roles. The man on the mace is depicted both as a ruler and as a participant in a ritual, as if he is not just governing, but personally opening the earth. This is not a myth or a god, but a real person shown demonstrating control over space and people. There's no name, title, or description nearby. Power is displayed through action, not words. The mace depicts violence and subjugation, but shows them as orderly rather than chaotic. This is actually one of the earliest examples of political propaganda carved in stone. The scorpion mace is inconvenient because it appears before its intended system. There's a ritual, a public scene, and a show of power, but still no state with names or laws. This object doesn't reveal who Scorpion is or was. It only shows when power needs an audience. A surviving tree. A tree rarely survives for centuries. Water, oxygen, and fungi destroy it faster than any archaeologist. So organic finds are always special. They show not only the shape of the object, but also the hand of the craftsman. During an excavation in western Russia, a wooden object with finger grooves and a carved end was found in a waterlogged layer. By its shape, it is an attached handle or a fastening element that once worked together with leather, a bone insert, or a bronze plate. Thin parallel scratches from a knife and draw knife are visible on the surface. You can identify work stages by frequency, rough shaping, then polishing, and sometimes finishing with an abrasive. Microscopy reveals porosity and annual rings, sufficient to identify the species, typically birch or alder. They are easy to work with and crack less during drying. Radiocarbon dating and associated ceramics date the complex to the late Stone Age, early Bronze Age. After extraction, the wood is wrapped in a damp cloth and then placed in a polyethylene glycol bath. Water in the cell walls is replaced with polymer, preventing warping during drying, followed by slow vacuum drying. Conservation reveals nuances. A small notch marks the assembly end, and micro holes for a cord rivet appear on the side. These minor details together suggest how it was used. The handle was inserted into a slot, secured with a cord or a peg, and operated under load. Secrets of the Chinese settlement. While building a water treatment plant in Shaoxing, Zhejiang Province, China, workers found unusual soil layers. Archaeologists from the Provincial Institute of Cultural Relics and Archaeology excavated and found remains of a 2,500-year-old coastal settlement. The find dates back to the time of the Yue Kingdom, which existed during the Warring States period, from 475 to 221 before Christ. Excavations revealed Baikal Yuan was a trade and maritime center. Two large wooden structures with a total area of about 1,300 square meters have been discovered. The first is a stilt house with terraces, straw, reed walls, and wooden posts tied with grass ropes. The second is a large platform of 10 rows of piles along the Kaui River bank. This construction required precise calculations and knowledge of loads and soil moisture. Experts say the mortise and tenon joints show knowledge of three-dimensional construction, typical of later dynasties. Clay urns, porcelain bowls, bronze drills, and stone tripods were found at the site. The pig burials attracted particular interest. The complete skeletons of the animals, laid along the shore, were likely part of a sacrificial ritual. These rituals show that the settlement's inhabitants linked water to fertility and life. Currently, archaeologists and city authorities are preparing a plan to reduce the area designated as an archaeological reserve. The site is called a time capsule of the late Bronze Age, which helps us understand how cities in ancient China were built, dependent on rivers and seas. Long-distance trade. In pre-dynastic Egypt, archaeologists find items that couldn't have been made locally. Burials and settlements from the late 4th millennium before Christ contain lapis lazuli beads, obsidian blades, seashells, and rare stones, materials not found in Egypt. Lapis lazuli was mined in what is now Afghanistan, thousands of kilometers from the Nile. These items are not limited to one area or rare exceptions. They are found across different Upper Egypt regions, often in high-status burials, sometimes as intentionally collected sets. The lapis lazuli beads have a similar size and shape. The obsidian tools were made using the same techniques. These are not one-time trophies or random finds, but items that regularly made their way to Egypt. Obsidian is especially telling. Its sources are in East Africa and Anatolia, and each piece can be identified by its chemical composition. Analysis shows some obsidian in Egypt comes from regions hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. This material was not used for jewelry. It was used to make cutting tools, and wear marks indicate its actual use. Seashells have been discovered in burials deep in the Nile Valley, far from the sea, brought there as ornaments or amulets. All these items are found in layers where there are no written sources or names of rulers yet. The objects show materials, people, and skills moving across distances that challenge the idea of isolated local communities. A buried Ferrari. In a Los Angeles backyard, buried under the earth, they discovered not treasure or old equipment, but a nearly new Ferrari Dino 246 Gran Turismo Spider. The car was buried at a depth of just a few dozen centimeters, carefully wrapped in plastic, and with all the openings stuffed with towels, as if they were trying to preserve it, not hide it. The detectives expected corpses or drugs, but found only traces of time and pristine sports car parts inside. A check showed the Ferrari was stolen 3 years ago. The owner got the insurance payout, and the case closed. But why would someone bury the car? Later, one of the detectives admitted that there were no children who accidentally found the car. An informant told them where to dig, hoping to cut a deal. The investigation found the car thieves planned to sink the car in the ocean, but liked it so much they hid it to retrieve later. However, they never returned. The insurance company sold the unearthed car at a closed auction, and the new owner fully restored it. Bran in the thicket. In the south of present-day Iraq. In 1928, Leonard Woolley uncovers the royal cemetery and pulls out from the rubble what at first looks like a broken wooden stick with lumps of metal. After restoration, a figure emerges, an animal on its hind legs, reaching for a bush-like structure. It was given a poetic nickname, the ram in the thicket, although zoologically it's more of a goat with curled horns. Its age is about 2,550 before Christ, which means it's 4,500 years old. The figurines were found in the rich burial of a noble Sumerian, next to whom lay sacrificial remains, 68 women and 5 men. It was a status ritual. No one went to the afterlife alone. The ram is wooden, covered with thin metal sheets, copper, gilding, inlaid with lapis lazuli and shell. The diamond pattern on the base may represent mountains, while the branching bush is often seen as the world tree, linking earth and heaven. A practical version is that the figurines acted as stands for bowls used in sacrificial rituals. The animal stands upright, holding a branch where a vessel with a drink or sacrificial liquid could be placed during ceremonies. This small object captures the Sumerian world: sacrifices, elites, skilled craftsmanship, cosmic symbolism, and practical altar tools. The ram in the thicket shows that ancient people combined beauty, faith, and daily use in one object, which is why these artifacts last for thousands of years. Armor from the era of Troy. In South Moravia, Czech Republic, archaeologists found bronze items, including a rare 3,200-year-old breastplate. The plate measures 40 by 30 centimeters. It covered the chest of an elite warrior. The surface is decorated with raised solar discs and triangular patterns, symbols of power and protection. The Brno Museum Team 3D scanned the fragments with a laser and digitally filled in missing parts. The model showed that the armor weighed about 1 kilogram, and the edges were bent inward to avoid injuring the wearer. Inside, there are traces of organic material, likely a leather lining. The breastplate was discovered with a spearhead, sickle, and several bronze rods. Such a set is rarely accidental. The researcher thinks that items were hidden as a ritual offering, perhaps as thanks to the gods for a harvest or victory. This is only the second discovery of this kind in the Czech Republic. The last was over 50 years ago. Bronze weapons then were crafted individually. Foundry men made a wax mold, poured in copper and tin alloy, and polished the blade to a mirror finish. That's why each piece of armor serves as a signature of the workshop and confirms the high level of craftsmanship in Central Europe, long before the arrival of the Romans. The unconventional metal of Egypt. A new study has revealed a simple fact. In the Middle Kingdom, around 2000 to 1650, before Christ, Egyptian craftsmen deliberately made arsenical bronze. Traces of a special additive were found in slags and melts. Spices are rich in arsenic. This is not an accidental impurity from the ore, but an intentional ingredient added to make the alloy harder, keep its edge sharp longer, and reduce wear. The analyses were carried out by a team from the Czech Academy of Sciences, together with colleagues in Cairo and France. The results showed that bronze composition was carefully controlled and replicated, indicating workshops had steady raw material supplies and a consistent technological process, not just random attempts to make strong bronze. There is also a side conclusion for scientists. The lead that entered the smelting process together with spice can mix isotopic indicators, which is why the origin of copper is overestimated in a number of studies. The head from Merimde. In the settlement of Merimde Beni Salama in northern Egypt, archaeologists discovered a clay human head dating back to around the 5th millennium before Christ. This is one of the earliest known depictions of a human face in Egypt. The find appears modest and rough, which makes it unusual. There is no decoration, ornamentation, or effort to embellish. The image is simply a clay face left in the settlement's residential layer. The head isn't linked to a burial. It wasn't found in a temple or ritual pit, but among everyday remains, near dwellings and household activities. The facial features are simple but intentional. The eyes, nose, and mouth clearly indicate a human head, made apart from the body, not abstract shapes or a mask. Evaluate the text for shortening opportunities. Maintain original meaning and proper names. Keep the speaker's perspective. Ensure at least 22% reduction in length. Output in correct JavaScript. Object notation format. Shortened version. Such a find is rare for its time. Early Egyptian cultures rarely depicted people in 3 dimensions, showing animals, symbols, and geometric motifs much more often. That's why the appearance of a human face in clay looks like a deliberate step, the meaning of which is still unclear. We don't know whom it depicted or why it was made. Archaeology only records the very fact of its existence. The first king. Belize Caracol jungles. For nearly 40 years, archaeologists Arlen and Diana Chase excavated stairs, markets, and dams, eventually reaching the heart of the Khan complex, the heavenly place. Beneath the thick slabs, they discovered a narrow passage leading to a cinnabar-painted chamber. On the floor lay a skeleton, its shoulders draped with jade beads. Nearby were 11 painted vessels, carved bone tubes, a mosaic mask, and spiny oyster shells, the color of raw meat. The stele's hieroglyphs have always named the city's first ruler as Tekabchak, Hand of Thunder. Now the text matches the bone. The dating is about 350, just a few decades after the ascension, in 331. Caracol was already independent before the famed Teotihuacan envoys arrived in 378. He was already ruling, trading, and collecting tribute before any foreign influence. The objects around the body tell their own story. Jade signifies royal blood, cinnabar represents sacrifice, spondylus shells show Caribbean trade, and thin bone tubes belong to priests who inhaled cocoa before rituals. This isn't a random collection, but portraits of the state assembled in its founder's personal capsule. For scientists, this skeleton is the opening chapter of Caracol's history, concealed by vines for nearly 1,500 years. Battle Axe Fiscum. At first glance, it looks like a black obsidian boomerang, but it's actually an elite battle axe from the late Neolithic era. A fisherman from Norway's Fiscum Lake caught it with his net in the 1780s. It weighed exactly 700 grams of solid basalt, smooth as polished marble. The dating, 2,850 to 2,350 before Christ, places the artifact within the battle axe culture. What stands out is the perfect symmetry. The blade is elongated like a boat's keel, and the hole for the handle was drilled from both sides with stone tubular drills, operations that took days to complete. Why so much effort? Such axes are rarely found with chipped edges, which means they were seldom used as weapons. It was probably a status symbol. Holding it shows everyone you own a rare material crafted by distant artisans. Polishing to a mirror shine is a story of its own. Basalt was ground with quartz sands until a glossy coating appeared on it. Thus, the axe turned into a black mirror, which, according to one theory, was used in rituals. The sun, reflecting off it, illuminated the owner's face, emphasizing his connection to the heavens. The Fiscum axe is now in Oslo's Museum of Cultural History. Under glass, it resembles a modern designer piece, yet it's 5,000 years old. Lacquered coffin. In 2018, archaeologists in China's Jiangsu province discovered a unique 700-year-old lacquered coffin from the Yuan dynasty. Its bright red surface was perfectly preserved thanks to the multi-layered lacquer coating, which first protects the wood from moisture and decay. Lacquered coffins symbolized high status in China and were made using complex techniques with multiple lacquer layers polished to a shine. This preservation method kept the coffin intact for centuries, with minimal damage. The discovery is also important because the Yuan dynasty left relatively few burials, and this coffin can tell us a lot about the burial traditions of that time. Narmer Palette. The Narmer Palette was discovered in Hierakonpolis Temple Complex. It is a stone slab made of dark schist, about 64 centimeters tall, dating to around 3,100 before Common Era. Formally, it's a cosmetic palette. In reality, it's an object that was never used in everyday life. It's too large, too detailed, and too demonstrative. A man wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt raises a mace over a captive, and the ruler's figure is much larger than the others. The gesture is captured at the strike's moment. Beside him stands an attendant with a subdued enemy before him. Opposite, a man wears the red crown of Lower Egypt. He leads the procession, inspecting his opponent's decapitated bodies arranged in order. At the center are the intertwined necks of fantastic beasts, a motif already in its finished form. Narmer's name appears in symbols within a frame, marking one of the earliest times a ruler's name is shown beside a power symbol. The palette was kept in a temple, not a burial. There are no explanatory inscriptions or words telling a story. Everything is expressed through poses, figure scale, and scene order. Idols made of silt. When only an overgrown ditch remains of an abandoned pond, an excavator usually comes to heal nature. Workers clean the bottom, remove the silt, and shape the banks. Archaeologists make discoveries from the past at such moments. Under a meter-thick layer of dense silt, archaeologists raise several stone figures, slabs with pronounced shoulders, a hint of a head, and slits instead of eyes. Some areas show polishing, others have chips, and one surface has ochre traces, suggesting it was once painted for a ritual. These are classic anthropomorphic idols, not garden decorations that were once placed on riverbanks and crossroads. The age can range from the late Neolithic to the early Iron Age. The laboratories will determine that, but the context itself says a lot. The figures stood by the water, symbolizing transitions between banks, village and field, or the living and ancestors. The silt here served as a safe. Low oxygen in the water prevented surface weathering. The carvings are easier to read than on exposed stones. On the ends, there are wear marks that suggest they were moved, possibly several times as the riverbed changed. In the ground, there are imprints of wooden stakes. Such an idol was not simply stuck in the ground. It was secured, supported, and sometimes surrounded with small stones like at altars. Theories include boundary markers or guarding a crossing. Another idea is it's simply a sign for a public gathering place, used for rituals or councils. Such finds are also a reminder of responsibility. Dredging work often destroys the cultural layer in an instant. Here, they made it in time, called in specialists, documented everything, and carefully removed it. Next is conservation, microscopy, and searching for nearby sacrificial pits or ceramic fragments to establish a solid date. Odd spot for a sphinx. The Sphinx stands in a very inconvenient place for a monument of its era. Unlike the pyramids, it is carved from a single rock in a lowland that was often flooded even in ancient times. Its body is severely damaged. Even in the New Kingdom, Egyptians performed major restorations, treating these objects as if they were already ancient in their own time. This is documented in inscriptions and restoration layers, not later fantasies. The strangest detail is the absence of direct evidence of construction. There are no inscriptions about the foundation, no reliefs depicting the process, and no construction settlements nearby. For Egypt, it's unusual. The more complex pyramids are better documented than the Sphinx. It's linked to Khafra only by context, location logic, and style, with no direct evidence. The Sphinx is a massive object without clear identification, which has sparked debates. Geologists noted erosion signs. Archaeologists observed unusual voids and shafts, and historians noticed gaps in the sources. None of these factors alone proves a different date, but together they make the Sphinx inconvenient for the simple version. What's important isn't if it's older than the pyramids by thousands of years, but something else. Pre-dynastic findings reveal Egypt used symbols, the body, rituals, and space well before the pharaohs. In this context, the Sphinx is no longer a random miracle, but part of a long process we can trace the start of, though its end remains unclear. A golden ring. Jerusalem, the city of David. Under the floor of a late Roman, early Byzantine building, archaeologists found a small golden ring, about 2,300 years old. That is from the period of the Second Temple and Hellenistic influence. It's smooth and plain, with no inlays. The ring was found embedded in the foundation's technical layer, beneath construction fill, indicating it was placed there during the foundation work, not accidentally lost. This isn't an isolated case. In the same area within a year, another similar ring and several small ornaments were also found under the foundation. Researchers note a Hellenistic custom where engaged girls or their families buried jewelry and children's items in a new house's foundation. It's a symbol of adulthood and a plea for protection. Its features, small size, feminine use, and daily worn gold, match. Now in the Israel Antiquities Authority Lab, the metal is being tested for its alloy and traces of garnet or other stones and compared to similar items to find its origin. Altai mummy. Altai, Paziric burial mounds. Thanks to the ice, the skin of a person about 2,500 years old has been preserved, and on it are almost faded tattoos. They restudied them. Scientists examined images with various lighting, analyzed pigments, and recreated techniques on models. Something unexpected was found. The tattoo wasn't done by one person. On the right hand, deer and big cats are depicted with fine lines and precise anatomy. This shows the skill of a master. On the left, the simpler, uneven geometry is likely an apprentice's work. This is the first clear case of multiple artists identified on one body. The pigment is regular soot. The tools are a single needle for outlining and a comb, several needles on a bar, for quickly making dots and shading. This mix accounts for the line's depth and texture seen under a microscope. In some areas, mummification incisions cut through the designs. That means they weren't preserved for rituals. The tattoos were everyday, showing status, group ties, or personal symbols. Skin lines show the Iron Age community structure. There are masters, there are apprentices, and there are simply complex body ornaments that were important during life, not after death. Oldest dress. In the late 19th century, archaeologists in the Tarkhan area south of Cairo found a linen dress that was long overlooked as ordinary. Thin fabric, neat seams, and a complex cut. For its time, it looked too ordinary to arouse suspicion. Radiocarbon analysis revealed the dress is about 5,000 years old, dating to the early beginnings of Egyptian civilization, before the classical dynasties. The dress was more than fabric. It was tailored with darts, pleats, and a thoughtful shape, requiring precise measurements, cutting, and knowledge of fabric movement. This isn't a cloak or primitive clothing, but a complex garment similar in construction to much later examples. For a society often labeled as early in textbooks, this appears to be a technological leap. The most striking aspect is the scale. Such a dress couldn't have been a one-time experiment. There must have been a whole chain leading to its creation. Growing flax, processing fibers, weaving, size standards, and specialists who do this all the time. This indicates a developed artisan class and ongoing elite demand, which doesn't appear suddenly. The Tarkhan dress challenges the usual view of a primitive ancient world, showing that early Egypt already valued everyday culture, focusing on form, the body, and appearance, not just ritual and power. This is another detail that doesn't match the idea of a slow, primitive beginning. Royal sapphire. This ring dates from the late 14th to early 15th century, when the English crown shifted from Richard II to Henry V. Craftsmen cut a solid blue crystal from sapphire and shaped it into a monolithic ring, rather than mounting it. Such work required not only a rare gemstone, but also the use of diamond powder, the only abrasive capable of polishing corundum. In the Middle Ages, sapphire was seen as the stone of justice. Kings and bishops wore it for agreements, believing it would make oath breakers fall ill with fever. On the cutting platform, there's a small step where the jeweler shaved the surface to prevent the cutter from slipping. The ring weighs under 10 grams, but in the 15th century, it cost as much as quality knight's armor. It likely belonged to a high court vassal. Documents identify the sapphire as part of the Norwich hoard, buried during the Lollard unrest and found 5 centuries later. A sword beyond time. When archaeologists opened a flooded tomb in Hubei province in 1965, they found a sword inside that had spent about 2,500 years in water. It was lying in a wooden scabbard, without any conservation or protection, yet it looked as if it had been made recently. The blade shone with a clear pattern and sliced paper effortlessly. It bore an engraving of the owner's name, Gujian, King of Yue. This sword is not just a weapon, it was made with a precision that's hard to explain. The alloy, the polishing, the tightness of the scabbard, everything was of the highest quality. But the main thing is that it survived centuries of war and complete oblivion and remained intact. Scientists still aren't sure how that's possible, but the very fact that such an item has reached us in working condition is a discovery. This sword serves as a reminder that an object can preserve history better than any words. Artificial cranial deformation. Some pre-dynastic Upper Egypt burials contain human skulls with unnatural shapes, according to archaeologists. The forehead is elongated backward. The back of the head is flattened. The contour of the skull is altered, yet the bones have fused properly and show no signs of trauma. These changes occur only in early childhood, when the skull is still soft and under prolonged pressure. The traces indicate a gradual, controlled process. The skull changed over months or years, not in a short period of time. Bandages or rigid elements were used to fix the child's head in position. The consistent, symmetrical deformations rule out accident or disease. It's important to note that such skulls are rare. This was not a widespread practice or a common feature. They appear in specific burials that differ from ordinary ones, which indicates a limited group of people underwent this procedure. There are no written explanations for this. There are no depictions of the process itself and no symbols that directly explain its meaning. A frozen Scythian boot. This boot is a genuine artifact from the past, over 2,300 years old. It was discovered in an Altai Mountains burial mound, where permafrost kept it perfectly preserved. This is Scythian footwear, made of leather and decorated with intricate patterns, and the sole is studded with bright beads. Such decoration indicates the high status of its owner. This was likely part of a noble Scythian's attire, possibly even a noble woman's. The Scythians were famous not only for their martial skills, but also for their ability to make things that could pass for works of art. Their clothing was practical and strikingly beautiful. Even the boot sole is decorated. Perhaps it was a ritual element or simply a desire to look stylish even after death. The Oxfordshire mirror. Today, a mirror is a common object, but in ancient times it was considered a magical artifact. Before you is a bronze Celtic mirror found in Didcot, England. It was created in the 1st century before Christ and is one of 18 such finds that have survived to this day. In the Iron Age, such items were incredibly rare and belonged only to a select few, possibly priests or noblewomen. But what was it used for? For beauty, rituals, or perhaps for communicating with another world? In ancient cultures, mirrors were seen as portals to other realms, and this mirror may have been used in shamanic rituals. Adorned with elegant patterns, this artifact remains one of the most mysterious discoveries in Britain. Its true purpose is lost to time, but who knows? Maybe it really did hold something more than just a reflection. Jade cicada. Before you is a jade cicada created during the Western Zhou dynasty. This artifact is not just an ornament, it had a deep symbolic meaning. In Chinese culture, the cicada was considered a symbol of rebirth and immortality, and jade was the stone of eternity. The figurine might be placed in the deceased's mouth before burial, believed to aid the soul's journey to the afterlife and rebirth. The red paint traces on the artifact are significant, as red symbolize protection and good luck. The finest carving demonstrates the high level of skill of ancient Chinese craftsmen. Notice the eyes, folded paws, and patterns that give the figurine a mystical look. These items were used in rituals and showed the religious beliefs of people of that time. A grain storage in the oasis. In the Fayum Oasis, away from the Nile's main course, archaeologists discovered evidence of a culture from about 5,400 to 4,400 before Christ, known as Fayum A. Though there are no major settlements or monuments, something immediately stands out during excavations. Large grain storages are deep pits where barley and emmer remains were preserved. Grain was stored in large amounts and clearly for long periods. These reserves can't be explained by random gathering of wild plants. Nearby, composite sickles with stone blades set in wooden or bone handles are found. These tools are intended for regular work and repeated use, not for one-time experiments. Fayum A offers a different view of Egypt, without signs of authority, elite burials, or ritual centers, but it shows a clear grasp of time cycles and planning needs. People grew, harvested, and stored food, planning ahead. This early sustainable economy existed in the region long before statehood. A metal rod. How can we explain this mysterious artifact? Inside a stone found in the Chinese Maizhong Mountains, collector Jilin Wang discovered a metal rod with threads, resembling a screw. But what's most strange is that solid rock formed around it, which suggests that the find could be millions of years old. Some say this meteorite contains an alien artifact. Others believe that this is an ancient man-made object that, for unknown reasons, ended up in the earth and turned into a fossil. Skeptics believe it's just a rare natural formation, and the screw is actually a fossilized marine organism. Interestingly, similar discoveries have been found worldwide. Is this coincidence or proof of ancient, unknown technology? For now, this artifact remains one of the most mysterious archaeological puzzles. A new type of predator. Scientists have discovered the skull of Bastedodon cyrtos, a new type of predator, in the Egyptian desert. This large carnivorous mammal belonged to an extinct group called hyenodonts and was at the top of the food chain, hunting ancient hippos, elephants, and primates. Bastedodon was named after the goddess Bastet, patron of cats and protector from misfortune. Its snout and teeth really resemble those of a cat. This animal was about the size of a leopard, had powerful jaws and extremely sharp teeth, which made it a formidable hunter. The discovery was made in the Fayum Depression, once a lush forest millions of years ago, now a desert. This area offers valuable insight into ancient African ecosystems. Hyenodonts once dominated predators, but climate change and advanced competitors caused their extinction. Now their place in nature has been taken by the ancestors of modern cats and dogs. An archaeology mistake. At the start of the 20th century, objects found in Egypt were quickly seen as evidence of an ancient, advanced civilization. These stone vessels had smooth walls, thin edges, and symmetry difficult to achieve by hand. Some had walls just a few millimeters thick, yet were carved from hard stone like diorite and basalt. These vessels soon supported the case for lost technologies. The problem was that the finds were removed from context and often published without exact details about their layer, location, or related objects. In some cases, the origin is known only from the words of the first collectors or antique dealers. Archaeological documentation was either missing or reconstructed after the fact. Nevertheless, images of the vessels began to take on a life of their own, and for decades wandered from books to films. Later, further studies and experiments showed that some shapes could be made with simple tools, sand, abrasives, and plenty of time. Experimental archaeologists have recreated similar vessels, spending weeks or months on them. This kept the findings complex but removed the need for unknown technologies. However, not all items could be explained with equal confidence. Some of the vessels remained poorly documented, and some even disappeared from scientific circulation altogether. They can't be re-examined, precisely dated, or compared with analogs. They exist only in publications and old photos. This story is still used as an argument on both sides. Some refer to it as proof that official science is hiding something, while others see it as an example of how easily a single find can turn into a sensation if taken out of context. They replace the alphabet? Quipu is a bundle of knotted ropes with a main thread and many colorful cords. It was long thought the Incas used the knots just to count corn and taxes, like an ancient abacus. Linguists and programmers uploaded 21 complete quipus from a Peruvian museum into a neural network. The algorithm analyzed the color of the rope, how far it hung from the main thread, which knots were tied, and in what order. The machine quickly found repeating combinations, like identical words in a long text. The same knots on the yellow rope matched grain storage records, while knots on the red rope were linked to warrior lists. Scientists compared this with colonial Spanish documents and realized that the quipu conveyed meaning much richer than simple counting. For example, a bundle of green rope plus 3 short knots almost always marks a place for storing corn, while red plus a double knot could mean a tax for the army. If the method is confirmed on many samples, quipu will be seen as more than a knot calculator and recognized as a true form of writing. The Incas should be moved from civilizations without writing to those who chose a different alphabet. a rope one. Africa and Israel. Archaeologists studied Tel Malhata, a mound in Israel's Negev desert, linked to the biblical city of Malata. Among the 6th century finds near Christian burials, they discovered something unexpected: 5 hand-carved figurines made of ebony. The material is Ceylon ebony, which grows only in southern India and Sri Lanka. That alone is a mystery, but what is most surprising are the faces. The figurines depict male and female torsos with expressive features, broad cheekbones, flat noses, and a high forehead. Researchers are convinced that these images have African features. On their heads are massive headdresses with holes in them. Perhaps this was so the figurines could be worn as pendants or amulets. The burials are Christian. Nearby were glass vessels, bronze and stone jewelry, and alabaster items. Among them were figurines clearly from another culture. This is not just a trade item. It's an object that had significance. Perhaps these were images of ancestors, or maybe symbols of the homeland that were preserved even after converting to a new faith. Byzantine Palestine was a crossroads for caravans, ships, and merchants from Africa, Arabia, and India. These figurines may have traveled hundreds of miles, passed through many hands, and ended up here in the sand among tombstones. For archaeologists, this is a rare find. It shows how deeply and intricately cultures were intermingled. People without names. When people talk about pre-dynastic Egypt, there's almost always a sense of emptiness, as if a fog lies between the stone circles of the desert and the first pharaohs. Archaeology finds settlements, rituals, elites, and complex burials, but rarely knows any names. It's strange, since items from the end of the 4th millennium before Christ suggest coordination, authority, and status awareness. These societies need leaders, yet their leaders appear to have intentionally vanished from history. Archaeologists excavated the so-called Tomb 100 in Hierakonpolis, dating to about 3,300 before Christ. Its walls featured paintings of boats, processions, violence, and power symbols. This is among Egypt's earliest narrative images. This level of decoration is rare in ordinary burials and needs both resources and people to organize and oversee a complex ritual. In Abydos's el-Ka'ab necropolis, large burial complexes from the late pre-dynastic period were found, including Ujay's tomb with hundreds of ivory and rare stone objects, plus the earliest proto-writing tags. These tags don't name rulers, but list territories, resources, and offerings, indicating centralized administration. These burials lack the royal titles, power formulas, and clear ruler identification that became standard a few centuries later. Instead, they use symbols like animals, signs, and scenes of subjugation. Power already exists here. It is evident in the scale of the tombs and the amount of resources invested, but it is not yet personalized. Ritual rice. In the northern Retidian cave, archaeologists found rice husk imprints on pottery that are at least 3,500 years old. The only traces are a thin starch film and phytoliths. That's enough to confirm the settlers reached Guam, bringing rice across 2,300 kilometers of ocean. No fields, terraces, or sickles have been found. The grains were saved for rituals, possibly yearly, to remind ancestral spirits of their home in Taiwan. For the islanders, rice became a symbol of origin rather than daily food, making the small traces on pottery more significant than a whole cemetery of bone harpoons. This has never been found before. Norway, Oslo, in the port district of Bjørvika, archaeologists discovered nearly 3,000 medieval artifacts during city excavations, most of which are leather. Shoes of all shapes, low and high boots, some with perforation or embossing, wrinkles on bends, paw prints on soles. People repaired their shoes until the very end. Leather was valuable. They also found over 20 leather bag fragments, showing that people wore items on belts or tied to clothes since clothing had no pockets. Scabbards from swords and knives were also discovered. Personal weapons were as common as wallets. The most moving discovery is over 40 children's shoes, some palm-sized, all sharing the same construction and patches, just in miniature. Children wore adult-style shoes and had their belongings cared for. The accumulation was discovered near old riverbank dumps by the Alna River. Trash was dumped by the water, and floods would wash it into the lowlands, covering and preserving it in silt without oxygen. That's why the leather stayed layered and intact until today. The Gibelinski murder. For almost 100 years, this story looked like an ordinary museum display. In the British Museum, there was naturally a dried-out pre-dynastic man from Gibelin, dated to around 3400 before Christ. He was found back in the late 19th century in a sandy grave, where the heat and dry air preserved the body without mummification. On the outside, everything looked calm, no signs of disaster, no obvious injuries, just a young man who lived a short life and ended up in the sand. But in 2012, they decided to scan him with a computed tomography scan, as if it were a modern investigation. And in the images, things became visible that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. They found a puncture under the left shoulder blade, along with other injuries that formed a clear scenario. The blow from behind was so forceful that the blade damaged the shoulder blade, broke a rib, and pierced the lung. Experts say the blade was likely at least 12 centimeters long and 2 centimeters wide, indicating it was a real blade, not a random object. The coldest thing about this discovery isn't even the wound itself, but the details surrounding it. He was about 18 to 20 years old. His body was strong, his muscles were developed, and there were no signs of a long illness. And there's another detail that caught the researchers' attention. They didn't find the typical injuries on his hands that appear when a person tries to defend themselves or grabs a weapon. It seems like a blow he never saw coming. It's strange. Pyramids, laws, and official records are still far off, yet violence is already clearly recorded in the body, much like modern forensics. This death wasn't legendary, recorded, or turned into myth. It lay in the sand, then in a museum, and later appeared in a photograph like a 5,000-year-old confession. All these discoveries show Egypt before the pyramids, as it is rarely imagined, complex, brutal, and much more mature than people usually think. Thank you for watching this video until the end. Goodbye, everyone.